Chapter 13, Marvellous Medicine Number 3. "Here it is!" cried Mr. Killiecranky, rushing into the kitchen. "1 carton of flea powder for dogs and 1 tin of brown shoe polish." George poured the flea powder into the giant saucepan. Then he scooped the shoe polish out of its tin and added that as well. "Stir it up, George!" shouted Mr. Cranky. "Give it another boil. We've got it this time. I'll bet we've got it." After Marvellous Medicine Number 3 had been boiled and stirred, George took a cupful of it out into the yard to try it on another chicken. Mr. Cranky ran after him, flapping his arms and hopping with excitement. "Come on, watch this one," he called out to Mrs. Cranky. "Come and watch us turning a chicken into a lovely great big one that lays eggs as large as footballs." "I hope you do better than last time," said Mrs. Cranky, following them out. "Come on, chicken," said George, holding out a spoonful of medicine number 3. "Good chicken, chick, 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 chick. Have some of this lovely medicine." A magnificent black cockerel with a scarlet comb came stepping over the The cockerel looked at the spoon, and it went peck. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" squawked the cockerel, shooting up into the air and coming down again. Right, I'm afraid I'm going to have to force mute because it's a bit noisy. Okay. "Watch him now!" cried Mr. Cranky. "Watch him grow! Any moment he's going to start getting bigger and bigger." Mr. Killiecranky, Mrs. Cranky, and little George stood in the yard staring at the black cockerel. The cockerel stood quite still. It looked as though it had a headache. "What's happening to its neck?" Mrs. Cranky said. "It's getting longer," George said. "I'll say it's getting longer." Oh, sorry. "It's getting longer," George said. "I'll say it's getting longer," Mrs. Cranky said. Mr. Cranky, for once, said nothing. "Last time it was the legs," Mrs. Cranky said. "Now it's the neck. Who wants a chicken with a long neck? You can't eat a chicken's neck." It was an extraordinary sight. The cockerel's body hadn't grown at all, but the neck was now about 6 feet long. "All right, George," Mr. Cranky said. "What else have you forgotten?" "I don't know," George said. "Oh, yes, you do," Mr. Cranky said. "Come along, boy, think. There's probably just one vital thing missing, and you've got to remember it." There's the chicken with his long neck. "I put in some engine oil from the garage," George said. "Did you have that on your list?" "Eureka!" cried Mr. Cranky. "That's the answer. How much did you put in?" "Half a pint," George said. Mr. Cranky ran to the garage and found another half pint of oil and some antifreeze. George called after him. "I sloshed in a bit of antifreeze." There's a pint. Okay. Chapter 14. Back in the kitchen once again, George, with Mr. Cranky watching him anxiously, tipped half a pint of engine oil and some antifreeze into the giant saucepan. "Boil it up again!" cried Mr. Cranky. "Boil it and stir it." George boiled it and stirred it. You'll never get it right," said Mrs. Cranky. "Don't forget, you don't just have to have the same things, but you've got to have exactly the same amounts of those things. And how can you possibly do that?" "You keep out of this," cried Mr. Cranky. "We're doing fine. We've got it this time. You see if we haven't." This was George's Marvellous Medicine number 4, and when it had boiled for a couple of minutes, George once again carried a cupful of it out into the yard. Mr. Cranky ran after him. Mrs. Cranky followed more slowly. "You're going to have some mighty queer chickens around here if you go on like this," she said. "Dish it out, George," cried Mr. Cranky. "Give a spoonful to that one over there." He pointed to a brown hen. George knelt down and held out the spoon with the new medicine in it. "Chick, chick," he said, "try some of this." The brown hen walked over and looked at the spoon. Then it went peck. "Ouch!" it said. Then a funny whistling noise came out of its beak. "Watch it grow!" shouted Mr. Cranky. "Don't be too sure," said Mrs. Cranky. "Why is it whistling like that?" "Keep quiet, woman!" cried Mr. Cranky. Give it a chance." They stood there staring at the brown hen. "It's getting smaller," George said. "Look at it, Dad. It's shrinking." And indeed it was. In less than a minute the hen had shrunk so much it was no bigger than a new hatched chick. It looked ridiculous. They had